March 10, 1945. Cold grey morning, New York Harbor. A troop ship bumps the pier and 48 German women step out, heads full of lice, clothes stinking from 18 months without a real wash. Sure, the Yankees will beat, shame, or kill them. They brace for kicks and rifle butts, and instead see metal basins, steaming showers, humming clippers, and the sharp, clean smell of soap. The first thing the Americans do is shave their heads and say, "I'm sorry." The second is hand them more hot food than they have seen since 1942. How did losing all their hair become the moment they started to get their dignity back? Stay with me to hear the full story. And if you like real World War II stories that almost no one talks about, please hit subscribe, like this video, and support the channel so we can bring you more. Because what happened in that camp was not propaganda. It was everyday American life, and it destroyed everything these women thought they knew about their enemy. They had been at sea for almost 2 weeks, locked below decks most of the time. The grey troop ship smelled of diesel fuel, stale sweat, and old metal. When the hatch finally opened to the March air over New York Harbor, 48 German women stepped out, blinking into the cold light. They were not soldiers in field grey. Most wore faded Luftwaffe or Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms, nurses, radio operators, typists, clerks. Their boots were cracked. Their collars were greasy with old dirt. Under their scarves and caps, lice moved in thick colonies that had lived on their scalps for 18 months. One of them, 24-year-old nurse Anna Bauer from Hamburg, gripped the rail and stared at the skyline. She had seen pictures of New York in magazines before 1939, shining towers, rich shops, smiling people. Nazi radio had given her a different image during the war, a rotten, violent city full of angry mobs and Jewish capitalists, a place where captured Germans would be beaten and worse. Now she saw something else again. The harbor was busy and strangely calm. Tugboats chugged, cranes squealed on their rails, longshoremen shouted to each other over the clang of chains and the slap of waves. No one pointed guns at the women, no one spat at them. To the American dock workers, they were just one more load in a harbor that by 1945 had already received more than 370,000 German prisoners of war. The paradox hit Anna like cold water. She had been told the Americans were barbaric, yet the first thing she smelled was not blood or filth. It was coffee from a canteen on the pier, and the sharp, clean sting of disinfectant. "Stand in line, 2 by 2, an American sergeant called. His German was rough, but understandable. His voice was firm, not cruel. The women shuffled down the gangplank. Their legs trembled after days in cramped bunks. They hugged their small bundles, a photo, a torn book, a worn-out comb. An MP walked beside them, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder, not pointed. That, too, broke an expectation. Back home, guards always held weapons ready. At the end of the pier, they were herded not into a cage, but into a long shed with steam clouding the air near the far end. Inside, tables were set up in rows. Medical orderlies waited with clipboards. On another table lay piles of cloth bundles and metal basins. Against one wall, an army barber chair. Next to it, an outlet with an electric cable snaking away, and on a small stand, a pair of humming clippers. "Delousing first," said a medical officer, "then showers, then clothes." His words were translated into German by a young interpreter, a German-American private from Ohio. "You have lice. We must remove them. Your hair will be cut short. Some heads shaved." A low moan moved through the line. For German women, long hair was a matter of pride and respectability. In Nazi posters, the ideal woman always had thick braids. Shaved heads were for criminals and traitors. The idea of losing their hair in front of foreign men felt like the humiliation they had been warned about. Anna's fingers went to the heavy knot at the back of her head. Under the pins, the hair felt stiff, greasy, alive with movement. The lice had driven her half mad at night in the previous camp, somewhere in France. She had scratched until the skin bled. Still, the thought of clippers on her scalp made her knees weak. One woman refused at first, clutching her braid with both hands. "You will not shame me," she whispered. "Do what you like, but not this." Her name was Lice, a former typist from Cologne. The American nurse in charge, Lieutenant Margaret Hill, did not shout. She stepped closer, her white coat brushing the rough floorboards, and spoke softly while the interpreter translated. "If we do not shave, the lice will stay," Hill said. "They will keep making you sick. You have been sick long enough. I am sorry, but this is to help you." Sorry? Anna thought. The enemy is sorry? In her diary, years later, she would write, "In that moment, I did not know what to hate, the clippers or the kindness." The first woman sat in the chair, shaking. The clippers buzzed. When the blades touched her scalp, a clump of hair fell to the concrete with a soft, strange sound. White lice spilled out of it, crawling, seeking new warmth. Orderlies stepped forward at once with powder and a broom. No one laughed. No one jeered. When it was Anna's turn, she kept her eyes on a knot in the wooden wall. She felt gentle fingers work her hair loose, felt the clippers pass again and again over her skull. Cold air touched skin that had not seen light in years. She waited for insults. None came. Instead, when the nurse nicked her scalp by accident, Hill stopped, dabbed the tiny cut with antiseptic that stung sharply, and said in slow German, "I am sorry?" Anna later wrote, "The strangest thing was not the loss of my hair. It was that the hands that took it were careful." As each woman stepped down from the chair, she was handed a plain cotton headscarf and pointed toward the steaming end of the shed where showers waited. The lice were gone. The shame they expected had not arrived. In its place was something harder to understand, a system that could strip them, disinfect them, and still see them as human. Outside, the harbour cranes kept moving, loading trains that would carry the women south to a POW camp in Virginia. Inside, under the hot water they were about to meet, another kind of journey was beginning, one that would not just clean their bodies, but slowly wash away what they thought they knew about America. What they saw next in the showers and the mess hall beyond would deepen the paradox and turn simple survival into a moral question. The train ran through the night, south from New York. When the doors opened again, the air was softer, smelling of pine trees and damp earth. The women climbed down at a siding near a large camp in Virginia. Guard towers stood at the corners. Barbed wire shone in the morning light. But the buildings inside the fence were painted white, and flower beds, small but real, grew beside the paths. They walked in single file past an American flag snapping in the wind. Their heads were now wrapped in plain scarves over rough stubble. Without hair, their faces looked older, their eyes huge. Anna felt the sun on her bare neck and the strange lightness on her scalp. The lice were gone. The crawling itch that had followed her for 18 months had stopped. In her mind, though, she still heard scratching. Inside the reception building, warm steam filled another tiled room. "Shower then, doctor," the interpreter said. "Clothes after." The women hesitated only a moment. The clippers in New York had been a shock. The hot water here was a promise. Anna stepped under the shower head. At first, nothing happened. Then a metal groan and suddenly a rush of water hot enough to sting. It hit her shoulders and back like a heavy blanket. She gasped. The water ran over her shaved scalp, down her spine, across skin that had been washed only in cold basins or rain for more than a year. The soap was smooth and white, with a faint smell of lemons and hospital. She held the bar in both hands for a second, feeling its weight. Then she began to scrub. Grey water ran off her body, then brown. She washed twice, 3 times, until her skin turned pink. All around her, water crashed onto tile. Some women cried quietly. Others let out little laughs that sounded almost like the girls they had been before the war. Later, Anna would say, "It was as if the dirt and the fear were leaving together. I felt my old self under my skin again." After the showers, they were given underwear, simple dresses, wool socks, and heavy coats from US Army stores. Everything was too big because they were so thin, but it was clean and warm. They tied their scarves back over their bare heads and shuffled into another room that smelled of alcohol and paper. Here, doctors waited, 3 officers in khaki with stethoscopes. Each woman was weighed, measured, listened to. The numbers were written down in neat columns. Anna, who had been 60 kilos before the war, now weighed barely 43. At least a third of the women showed signs of anemia. Old wounds were checked, sores were cleaned. A feverish girl with a hollow cough was sent straight to the small camp hospital. By early 1945, the US Army was feeding and housing roughly 380,000 German POWs in more than 500 camps across the country. What these women received was not special. It was simply the standard system at work: medical care, shelter, and food according to the Geneva Convention. The food came next. They were marched to a long, low building with big windows. As they stepped inside, a thick smell hit them. Meat frying, bread baking, coffee, boiled potatoes. The sound was just as strong. Plates clattering, ladles scraping metal trays, voices calling orders in English. The serving line seemed to go on forever. Behind the counter, army cooks in white aprons stood ready. One held a spoon above a mound of mashed potatoes that steamed in the cool air. Another carved slices from a roast. Large pans of green beans and carrots shone with butter. There were baskets of sliced bread, and farther down something bright and yellow in heavy syrup. Canned peaches. "Take," said a cook, gesturing. "Plenty," the interpreter added in German. "They say you can eat as much as you like, but slowly. Your stomachs are not used to it." For a moment, no one moved. The women stared. In their last camp in France, they had eaten thin soup and 1 piece of stale bread a day. At home, ration cards had grown tighter each year. Here, in the enemy's country, food lay in wide metal trays, so much that some of it would not be eaten. Anna placed her tin plate on the counter. The cook gave her a scoop of potatoes, a thick slice of meat with brown gravy, a spoonful of beans. At the end, a woman with grey hair and kind eyes added a piece of bread and 2 peach halves that trembled in syrup. Anna sat at a table with the others. For several seconds they just looked at their plates, and then one woman took a bite. She chewed slowly, eyes closed. Tears ran down her face. "It tastes of nothing," she whispered at first, then shook her head. "No, it tastes of everything." Anna raised the fork to her mouth. The meat was soft and salty. The potatoes were rich and smooth. The beans had a bite that told her they were fresh, not dried. When she tasted the peach, sweet and cold, she remembered a summer before the war, a market in Hamburg, her mother laughing. That night, in her bunk, under 2 wool blankets, the guilt came. She lay on a mattress for the first time in months, her stomach full, the smell of clean sheets and faint disinfectant around her. In the dark, thoughts turned toward home. She tried to picture her parents' flat in Hamburg, but now bombs had fallen there too. News had reached even the camps. Firestorms, whole streets gone. Her last letter from home, months old, had spoken of 1,000 bomber raids and sharp ration cuts. Her mother had written, "We stretch everything. We are thin, but our spirit is strong." That had been before the last great air attacks. Anna was now eating more than 2,500 calories a day, nearly as much as an American soldier. In many German cities by 1945, civilians survived on barely 1,000. Each spoonful, each peach slice in her memory felt heavier when she thought of that. "Why here?" she wrote in a small notebook given to her by a camp worker. "Why am I safe and warm while my family hides in cellars? The enemy feeds me better than my own state ever did. I do not know what to do with this fact." Around her, other women lay awake with the same double feeling, relief in their bodies, a stone of shame in their chests. The camp was saving their lives. Somewhere beyond the ocean, people they loved faced hunger under falling bombs. In the days that followed, the routines of this place, roll call, meals, work lists, began to shape their hours. But it would be the faces they met inside the wire and beyond it that truly tested what they believed about America. Days in the camp began to follow a pattern. A bell rang at dawn. The women lined up in the cool air while a guard with a clipboard counted them. Then breakfast, work details, lunch, more work, evening roll call. The barbed wire and watchtowers never moved, but inside that frame something else was quietly changing, the shape of the enemy. Most of the guards were young. Many had soft southern or midwestern accents. They carried rifles but often held them loosely, as if they did not expect trouble. Some had sunburned necks and farmers' hands. One morning, as they stood in line, Anna saw a guard yawn and rub his eyes like any tired boy. She felt an odd jolt. In posters back home, Americans were always shown as fat, cruel, or greedy. This one just looked homesick. By 1945, about half of all German POWs in the United States, nearly 190,000 men, were sent out on work details in agriculture and industry. The women's work was lighter. They washed laundry in big steaming tubs, peeled potatoes in the kitchen, sewed torn clothes, or cleaned hospital rooms. For this, they were paid a few cents a day in canteen coupons. One guard in charge of the laundry detail stood out. His name was Private Jack Miller from Iowa. He had sandy hair, a scattering of freckles, and a habit of humming to himself. His German was poor, but he tried. He pointed to a laundry cart one day and said, "Cart, C-A-R-T." Then he tapped his chest. "Jack." He pointed gently at Anna. "You?" "Anna," she replied. He smiled. "Anna, good name." After that, he used every spare minute to teach her words. Soap, bucket, towel, sun, rain. Sometimes he sketched pictures on scrap paper and wrote the English word under them. "You learn, you go home, you speak," he said, slowly. "War finish, peace." Anna later remembered, "He treated our English like a gift, not a weapon. I waited for him to show the other face we had been warned of. It never came." The first time a Red Cross truck arrived, the camp felt almost festive. A white van with a red cross on each side rolled through the gate, raising dust. Volunteers in light coats climbed down, carrying boxes. They smelled of perfume and cigarettes. They brought books in German and English, simple novels and dictionaries. They brought knitting needles and yarn, paper and colored pencils, even a football. They asked, through the interpreter, about needs and complaints. It was all carefully recorded. This too came from the Geneva rules, but to the women it felt like kindness. In the recreation hut they set up a radio. Faint swing music floated on the warm air, all brass and drums, strange and lively. One night, listening to it, Liesl whispered, "They told us this music was corrupt, but it only sounds happy." Work sometimes took the women outside the wire. In late spring, a truck carried a group to a nearby cannery that needed extra hands. They sat on wooden benches in the back, the truck's metal floor, rattling under them. Through the slats, Anna saw America roll past. The small Virginia town had white churches, neat houses with porches, and shops with glass windows that were not broken. A grocery store window displayed rows of canned food, bright labels in red and yellow. At a gas station, a man filled a car's tank while his little boy licked an ice cream cone. There were no bomb craters, no burned-out trams, no piles of rubble. Anna thought of Hamburg, flattened by firebombs in 1943. She had not seen it since, but letters had hinted at ruins and months of clearing bricks. The numbers that filtered through even to German civilians were grim. Tens of thousands dead in a single raid, whole districts erased. Now, across the ocean, petrol flowed, and children ate ice cream as if the war were a distant rumor. The biggest shock, Anna wrote later, was not their guns or their factories. It was that their normal life had never stopped. Inside the cannery, the air smelled of metal, steam, and tomatoes. The women stood at long belts, sorting fruit. American workers nearby joked and called out over the clank of machines. Some stared at the Germans with open curiosity, but no one shouted insults. An older woman at the next table passed Anna a pair of gloves and said with a nod, "Hot. Careful." The interpreter was not needed for that. Back in camp in the evenings, the women gathered in the recreation hut where a projector hung from the ceiling. Once a week, the Americans showed films. Sometimes it was a comedy, with people slipping on banana peels and laughing in crowded streets. Sometimes it was a musical, with bright dresses and songs that stayed in the mind. To see these films, Lice said, was to see that their lives have room for nonsense, for joy. We were told they were all hard and cruel, but they dance. This was the paradox that would not go away. The state that had promised Germans greatness had brought them bombed cities, hunger, and fear. The state they had been told was rotten and weak was feeding them, paying them a little, and letting them watch silly movies. This wasn't propaganda, it was reality, Anna would say years later. We saw it with our own eyes in the faces of boys like Jack and women in the cannery. Yet questions still hung in the air of the barracks at night. Some women insisted it was all a trick, a show to make them soft. Others began to doubt their old beliefs, but were afraid to say so out loud. The real break would come not from music or movies, but from darker images the Americans chose to share as the war in Europe reached its end, images that showed what had been done in Germany's name and why this camp followed rules when so many others had not. By April's in 1945, the air in the camp felt different. Spring came to Virginia. The trees outside the fence turned green, and warm rain tapped on the tin roofs. Inside, rumors moved faster than the clouds. Guards spoke in low voices. Maps on the Americans' bulletin boards showed new lines every week, pushing deep into Germany. One morning, the interpreter gathered the women in the mess hall. He stood on a small platform, paper in his hand. The room smelled of coffee and metal trays. Outside, a flag snapped in a brisk wind. "German army has collapsed on the Western Front," he said in slow German. "American and British troops have crossed the Rhine. The Red Army is in Berlin's suburbs. Your cities—" He paused, searching for a word. "Your cities suffer greatly." A murmur went through the room. Some women stared down at their hands. Others shook their heads. "It cannot be so bad," Lice whispered. "We are told we will strike back. New weapons, new hope." But each week, the news was worse. By late April, they heard that Hitler was dead. Soon after, that Berlin had fallen. The Reich they had grown up under had lasted 12 bloody years. Now it was gone. Then the Americans decided it was time to show them why the war had turned so completely. One warm evening, instead of a comedy or musical, the projector in the recreation hut showed something else. The curtains were drawn. The room was crowded. The air held the smell of dust, sweat, and the faint oil of the projector. The machine hummed, and black and white images jumped onto the screen. At first, the women were not sure what they were seeing. A gate with strange words. Arbeit macht frei. Barbed wire. Long wooden barracks, worse than anything they had known. Then the camera moved closer. They saw people in striped uniforms, more bone than flesh, eyes too large in hollow faces. They shuffled past piles of shoes, mountains of hair, suitcases with names still painted on them. In one terrible shot, a bulldozer pushed bodies, thin, naked, piled like sticks, into a trench. "This is Buchenwald," the interpreter said quietly. "This is Bergen-Belsen. This is Dachau." American and British troops had forced German civilians to walk through these places. Now they were forcing Germans in America to look as well. Some women cried out and covered their faces. Others stared with dry eyes, too shocked to move. A few hissed, "Lies! This is made for us. Hollywood tricks." Anna could not look away. The shaved heads on the screen hit her hardest. Only weeks before, American nurses had shaved her head to kill lice, then wrapped it in a clean scarf and led her to hot showers. On the screen, heads were shaved to strip away identity before work and death. In Virginia, the clippers had been an act of care. In those camps, they were part of cruelty. That could have been us, she thought, and then caught herself. The people on the screen were Jews, political prisoners, Roma, prisoners of many nations, people her own government had called enemies or less than human. She had never seen them like this before. She wrote, the same buzzing sound of clippers, the same bare scalp, but in our camp they apologized when they cut us. In those camps, no one apologized. They took everything. After the film, an American officer and a Red Cross representative spoke. They handed out a printed sheet in German, summarizing what had been found. Over 6 million Jews targeted for destruction. More than 40,000 camps and sites of detention or forced labor across German-controlled Europe. Train schedules, lists, numbers. It was not rumor. It was paper, stamped and signed. Then the Red Cross man did something else. He held up a small blue booklet. "This is the Geneva Convention of 1929, he said. "Your government signed it. Our government signed it. It says prisoners of war must receive enough food, basic medical care, protection from violence. It says they may work, but must be paid. That is why you get rations, doctors, and coupons for the canteen. It is not a favor. It is a rule." Anna felt the words like a weight. She remembered a transit camp near the Channel months earlier, where she had briefly seen British prisoners through a fence. Thin men in ragged uniforms, guards shouting, a rifle butt striking one across the shoulders. No Red Cross trucks there, no clean mattresses, no movies. In the barracks that night, the whispers were different from before. "I saw Jews taken from our street in 1941, murmured one woman from Frankfurt. "We were told they were going to work in the East, but why would workers be starved like that?" "My brother wrote from Poland," another said, voice shaking. "He hinted about shootings. I told myself he was exaggerating. Now I think, no." Still, some clung to denial. "The Americans show us only what suits them," Lice insisted at first. "They treat us well so we will think they are better. They show these films so we will turn against our own people." "But remember," Anna replied softly, "this wasn't propaganda. It was reality. Look at how they treat us compared to how those people were treated. If they wanted us dead, they would not worry about lice or vitamins. Something is different here." In her small notebook, Anne wrote, "Our side said it fought for honor and order, yet it built places with no rules. Their side we called barbaric, yet they bind even their enemies with rules that protect life. Where, then, is honor?" The Reich had already fallen on maps and in ruined cities. Now in this quiet southern camp it was falling inside the minds of some of its daughters. They had come to America as loyal subjects of a mighty state. They now saw that state had broken its own promises and treaties. Soon the wire would open. The war in Europe was ending. Ships would carry them back toward the wreckage of their homeland. They would leave Virginia with shaved heads now covered in short new hair and with beliefs cut down just as sharply, waiting to grow back into something very different. In May 1945, the camp loudspeaker crackled to life. The women stopped what they were doing, peeling potatoes, hanging sheets, sweeping floors. The interpreter's voice came over the metal cone. "Germany has surrendered," he said. "The war in Europe is finished." The mess hall was very quiet. Knives paused above cutting boards. A spoon clinked against a tin cup. Some women began to cry. Others stared ahead with empty faces. For 6 years they had heard speeches about final victory. Now the Reich was gone. Anna felt strange. She had waited for this moment with fear. She expected to feel shame or rage at the enemy. Instead, there was only a heavy tiredness and a question, what comes next? For a time, nothing changed. The work lists stayed the same. The food stayed the same. The guards were a little more relaxed. Some even said, "Soon, home," with a small smile. But ships were scarce. Millions of prisoners had to be moved. In all, more than 3 million German POWs were in Allied hands in the West. Sending everyone back would take months, even years. In late 1945, Anna's name finally appeared on a list. Repatriation, the slip of paper said. She and 30 other women were told to pack their few things. A cold wind blew across the camp as they climbed into trucks for the last time. The wire slipped away behind them. The harbor in New York looked different now that she was leaving. It was still busy, cranes swinging, gulls crying over the grey water. But this time she was not arriving in fear. She was leaving something that, in a hard way, had kept her alive. On the ship, the air smelled of diesel and sea salt. The bunks were close. The women shared rumors about home. "My cousin wrote that Munich is half rubble," one said. "They say in Cologne only a few church towers are left," said another. In 1945, nearly every big German city lost at least half its buildings, someone added quietly. The numbers were too large to picture. When the ship finally reached the German coast, Bremerhaven in the north, the women crowded the rail. The sky was low and grey. Along the harbour lay the skeletons of ships, rusting where they had sunk at their moorings. Warehouses stood open to the weather, their roofs gone. A sharp smell of coal smoke, damp bricks and sewage drifted across the water. They were put on a train. The car was unheated. Frost formed on the inside of the windows. As it scraped past station after station, the scale of the damage became clear. Whole blocks were flattened. Chimneys and bits of walls stood up from fields of broken stone. In some places, people had built shacks from wood and scrap metal in the ruins of grand houses. Anna's train reached Hamburg on a grey afternoon. She stepped onto a platform where only half the roof remained. The rest had been melted and twisted by firebombs in 1943. It was said that more than 40,000 people had died in that week alone. She walked the streets with numb feet. Cold wind pushed soot into her eyes. The city she remembered, bookshops, cafes, a park with a bandstand, had vanished. In its place were piles of bricks, twisted tram rails, blackened trees. Women in patched coats pushed wheelbarrows of rubble. Children with thin faces dug through debris, looking for metal or wood. She found her parents not in their old flat, it was a hole in the ground, but in a crowded emergency shelter, an old school on a hill. The hallway smelled of cabbage soup, wet wool, and too many bodies in one place. Her mother looked 20 years older. Her hair was almost white. Her father's shoulders had sunk, and he limped from a wound taken in an air raid. Her younger brother was missing, reported lost in the east. When they saw Anna in the doorway, her mother gave a small cry and rushed to her. For a moment there was only the warmth of arms and the salt taste of tears. "You are alive," her mother whispered. "We thought you in enemy hands, we thought." Later, sitting on a hard bench with a tin mug of thin soup, they asked her what it had been like. "Did they beat you?" her father said. "Did they starve you?" her mother asked, eyes wide with fear. "Did they? Did they shame you?" Anna hesitated. Outside, a handcart rolled past, wheels squeaking. Somewhere, a baby cried. She remembered hot showers, white soap, the smell of coffee in the mess hall. She thought of the smooth mattress under her back, the peaches in syrup, the doctor's cool stethoscope. She also remembered the films of the camps, the piles of dead in places run by her own state. "They shaved our heads because of lice," she said slowly. "They gave us very short hair. That was hard. But after they fed us, they had rules. We had beds. We worked, but we were paid a little. It was better than here." Her mother's face changed. The joy at seeing her faded into something tighter. "Better?" she repeated. "While we hid in cellars and lived on 800 calories a day, 2 thin slices of bread, a little potato, you had meat, you had peaches." Her father looked away. "You slept on American mattresses," he said, not loudly, but with a dull hurt. "We slept on cement. We burned our furniture to stay warm, but at least we were not prisoners." Anna could not answer. Her throat felt dry. The paradox was cruel. She had been a captive, yet safer and better fed than her own family, who had stayed free under a regime that promised to protect them. In the weeks that followed, she helped clear rubble by day and stood in ration lines at dawn. She took work when she could at a small hospital, wiping floors at first, then slowly returning to nursing as more doctors and supplies arrived under Allied occupation. She saw patients with frostbite from the winter of 1946-47, when some areas of Germany had food rations drop below 1,000 calories, and coal was so short people froze in their flats. Sometimes at night, as she lay on a straw mattress in a cold room, she thought of the Virginia camp. In her memory, it smelled of soap and coffee and fresh bread. She hated that part of her, longed for those sounds and smells. She also knew that what she had seen there, the different way of treating prisoners, the brutal films from the Reich's own camps, had cut her old beliefs to the root. Around her, other former POW women faced the same mix of gratitude and guilt, resentment from neighbors, and the hard work of rebuilding. Most spoke little of their time in America. When they did, they chose their words carefully. Only years later, when new generations grew up asking, "What did you know? What did you see?" would women like Anna begin to speak more freely about shaved heads, about white soap, and about how life as a prisoner had turned them into witnesses. Years passed. The lice and the wire faded, but some things stayed sharp in Anna's mind. The buzz of the clippers, the first sting of hot water on her shaved scalp, the taste of canned peaches in a foreign land. Hamburg slowly rose from the ruins. In the 1950s, new blocks of flats went up where craters had been. Streets were cleared. Trams ran again. With American and Allied aid, the Marshall Plan sent about $1.4 billion worth of help to West Germany alone. Between 1948 and 1952, factories restarted. By the mid-1950s, West German industrial output was more than double what it had been in 1947. People called it the economic miracle. Anna worked through those years as a nurse in a new hospital with clean white walls, modern machines, and regular supplies. Sometimes, as she walked through bright corridors that smelled of disinfectant and coffee, she thought of the camp hospital in Virginia. The sounds were similar: clink of instruments, murmur of voices, a radio playing quietly somewhere. She married a man who had fought on the Eastern Front and spent time in a Soviet camp. His stories were very different from hers. Starvation, beatings, no Red Cross, no Geneva rules. By 1945, more than 3 million German prisoners were in Soviet hands. Many would not return until the mid-1950s, and hundreds of thousands never came back at all. When he listened to her talk about America, he sometimes shook his head in disbelief. "They shaved your head," he would say, "but they also shared their bread." "Yes," she answered. "That is exactly the point." For many years, she only spoke of her time as a POW in short pieces. Hair shaved because of lice, work in the laundry, good food, too much food, while Germany starved. The horror film about the camps. She felt that to say we were treated well in a land that still remembered hunger and rubble was almost indecent. But her children grew up in a calmer world. They went to schools that taught them about Hitler, about Jews, about war crimes. They saw photographs from Auschwitz and Treblinka. They asked questions that had not been asked in the 1950s or early 1960, i.e. "Mother," her daughter said one evening, "where were you when all this happened? What did you see? What did you believe?" So Anna began to talk more fully. At the kitchen table, over the smell of stew and freshly brewed coffee, she told them about Virginia. She described standing in line, lice crawling, sure that the Americans would humiliate them. She told how instead they brought clippers, soap, and an apology. They had every reason to hate us, she said. We had bombed their cities. Our U-boats had sunk their ships. We had followed a man who built those camps you see in the books. Yet the first American sentence I remember is, "We must help you." When her grandchildren were born, the questions took a new form. School projects, history reports, TV documentaries. Once, in the 1990s, a local historian visited with a tape recorder. By then, Anna's hair was thin and white, but her voice was steady. "We went out into the world as Germans," she told him. "We had been told we were a special people, that we brought order and culture. We ended the war in a camp in Virginia, learning that the people we called barbaric had laws to protect even us. We had come as conquerors. We left as students." She kept a small box in her wardrobe. Inside were a few relics. The worn German-English word list Jack had written for her on scrap paper, a camp canteen coupon worth 5 cents, a Red Cross booklet with the Geneva Convention text. Now and then she would open it, and the faint smell of old paper would take her back to that strange island of rules and plenty in the middle of war. Once, a letter arrived with an American stamp. It was from Jack Miller's daughter. She had found Anna's name in her father's papers after he died. He had kept a faded photograph of the camp laundry group and a note. German girl Anna taught me that enemy also human. In her reply, Anna wrote, "Your father's small kindness, the extra word, the simple respect, did more to break the teaching of my youth than any gun. This wasn't propaganda. It was reality. I saw it every day." By the end of the century, Anna was an old woman in a quiet street of a wealthy, peaceful Germany. Her grandchildren spoke English, traveled, watched American films without thinking of enemy lines. When they asked her what the war had taught her, she did not talk first about tanks or bombs. She talked about lice crawling under hair that had not been washed in months, about the terror of sitting in a barber's chair before an enemy nurse, about the shock when that nurse's hands were gentle, and her first act, after cutting, was to offer soap and hot water. They could have chosen cruelty, Anna told them. No one would have stopped them. Instead, they chose rules. They chose to see us as people. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not its bombs or its tanks, but its abundance and its decision to share a little of that even with us. Her story was just one among millions, but together such memories formed a bridge between former enemies. They helped turn a war of total destruction into, at least in the West, a peace that held. For Anna and many women like her, the memory of shaved heads, white soap and full plates in a guarded camp never lost its power. It was proof that even in a world of camps and rubble, humanity could still reach across the wire. In the story of these German women, we see more than a side note of war. We see how ideas can die and be reborn in very simple places: a washroom, a mess hall, a hospital ward. They had marched out under banners of conquest and certainty. They came home with questions and doubts planted by soap, rules, and a full bowl of stew. The Reich tried to build power through fear and lies. The Americans, for all their own faults, often chose another path, binding themselves to laws, feeding even their enemies, letting realities speak louder than slogans. In that quiet contrast between shaved heads used to save lives and shaved heads used to crush them, lies a lesson that still matters. When you hold power, how you use it shapes not only your enemies, but the future itself.